Hello guys, and welcome back to Joe's Ventures. And today we're doing part 170 of our Planet Zoo mod spotlights, where we take a look at some of the wonderful mods people are making and you compare them to the wonderful biodiversity that we share our world with. So today we're finishing off the British Butterfly pack done by Scott. I've also got a few more exhibit mods done by Narwhal and some other really cool animals. A lot of critically endangered animals today, which I'm quite excited to get stuck into. So we're going to be starting off today with the butterflies. We're going to be having a look at the small tortoise shell. So let's have a look at these wonderful guys. Let's see if we can get a good look at them. Perfect. Look at this little cutie. So they're the small tortoise shell, or Argyll's Icarid, I believe you said that. These guys are a colourful Eurasian butterfly in the family Nymphalidae. And they are a medium-sized butterfly. As you can see, they're mainly like a reddish-orange. And they have black and yellow markings along the wing there. You can see a couple of yellow markings there, and along with the black and a little bit brighter colours. As well as a ring of blue spots, as you can see, around the edge of the wing, which is really cool. They have a wingspan ranging from about 4.5 to 6.2 centimetres. So they are not huge butterflies, but still pretty big. And they actually are the national butterfly of Denmark, believe it or not. So these guys have an absolutely massive range. So they are found throughout temperate Europe, Asia Minor, so like throughout Asia, Central Asia, Siberia, China, Nepal, Himalayas in India, Mongolia, Korea, and Japan. Basically, wherever common nettle, which what their larvae feed on, is found. And there's actually a few records of them in New York City, but that is believed to be because of introduced butterflies or introduced insects. And there's a few different subspecies around the place. There is another, was the Croatian small tortoiseshell. It's a species or a different animal. It's kind of neither here nor there. But in terms of their life cycle, very interesting animals. So these guys, as many other species of nymphalid butterflies, the caterpillars feed on stinging nettle and small nettle. Humulus limparus is thought to be recorded as larval food plants, with adults feeding on nectar. The species actually is one of the longest seasons of any Eurasian butterfly, extending from early summer to late autumn, with adults overwintering in a hibernation, emerging in the first warm summery days of the year to mate and breed. In the southern part of their range, they may actually have 2 broods each year, but northern insects are inhibited by the long length of the summer days for breeding a second time. So tortoise shells usually emerge from their pupae about mid-July into August, and they begin hibernation sometime in October, and immediately show territorial behavior after hibernation. The tortoiseshell butterflies that are found in the north usually have 1 brood per season, but as I mentioned, south has 2. Their ability to go through 3 generations of butterflies in a year is due to the tortoiseshell's butterfly decreased thermal requirement, and they're also, the larvae of this butterfly is quite social. And the larvae can be found on the stinging nettle, which has a high nitrogen content and much water in the leaves. So in terms of hibernation, as I mentioned, they tend to stay into hibernation around mid to late September. And typically the butterfly finding dark sheltered locations. And because of this hibernation, they need to accumulate a lot of fat to survive the winter. They need to be at least 20% of their body weight to actually be lipids in order to survive, which makes them much slower. And towards the end of the foraging for hibernation, they are much more susceptible to birds' attack because of low muscle to body mass ratio. So being heavier means they're more likely to get attacked by predators. And up to 50% of the population hibernating in any given area can be eaten. And the butterfly that hibernates in areas containing more light and that are accessible to rodents who can climb are most susceptible to this type of predation. But during hibernation, tortoiseshell butterflies are able to supercool in order to keep from freezing, and in sheltered areas they can stand up to minus 21 degrees Celsius without freezing, where they will experience a rapid weight loss during unusually mild winters. So in terms of, we'll talk about feeding. So for most butterflies, their nectar is the main source of nutrients, and they must be able to recognize different floral aromas and colors. They're able to differentiate between various flowers through visual signals. And tortoiseshell butterflies tend to prefer colors on both ends of the visual light spectrum for humans, and that like violet and red. And this ability comes from their compound eyes. And in terms of their kind of predator defense, the wings of these guys conceal them quite well from predators. When closed, they look like leaves, And on the ground, it may take birds up to 30 minutes to see them. So you can see that looks like a leaf there. In addition to when they're discovered, they will flick their wings in order to reveal bright colours and have eye spots to scare predators. And it tends to frighten birds, but also acts as a warning, as the bright red coloration shows predators, hey, I don't taste really good. Why would you bother with me when you can go find something else much more delicious? And they're also quite particularly fast. And like other species of butterflies, they do have territorial behaviour. The females will generally be found in concentrated areas, and the males will stay in an area to increase their mating opportunities. They usually bask and feed until midday and display territorial behaviour until roosting. Males will typically defend a certain territory for up to 90 minutes, unless they attempt to follow a female or oust another male, and the next day they find a new territory to defend, so they go around every day finding a new territory. And in terms of their migratory patterns, during migration, they position themselves in accordance to air currents, and they only start migrating at certain wind speeds. They are able to do this because they have an extra sensory organ in their antennae, as they're Quadrilateral-Johnson's organ, which is a secondary antennae that's used by insects to test air currents or detect air currents. And because their host plant, the stinging nettle, grows widely in a lot of areas, they're able to move around more and more than some other butterflies. And these areas tend to be in short thickets or scrubs. But also, a little sadly, they are declining in a lot of their habitats. So once among the most common butterflies in Europe and temperate Asia, they've gone through a very rapid decline, at least in Western Europe, and this can be due to the decline of their host plant because the nettle was widespread and even enjoys general eutrophication. The chrysalis is also sometimes eaten by wasps, but there's also some regression. But things like habitat destruction, especially drought, has really affected these populations and affected their reproductive success. So the summers from 1976 to 1995, the butterfly had more success in summers that were cool and wet at the beginning, and summers that then it was hot and dry. And they may actually be sensitive to global warming. So this species is particularly affected by droughts. And during periods of droughts, they have a vastly reduced reproductive rate. The droughts directly affect the stinging nettle leaves. The higher nitrogen and water content in the leaves, the more rapid the larvae look. And during a drought, both of these levels drop. That leaves them nothing to feed on, and the timing is rather crucial for this factor. So basically, it's kind of a luck thing. And if they don't get it right, the babies don't get enough nutrition, which is a little bit tragic. Yeah, they're still a very widespread and common butterfly, so nothing too much to set off some alarm bells. But again, another really nice one done by Scott. Another one really, really great. So let's have a look at the next species, also done by Scott. The last species from the pack. We've got the White Admiral. So let's have a look at these guys. And look, perfect first go. So this is the Eurasian White Admiral, or Lemestis camala. There is the American one. These guys are same family. They're in the family Nymphalidae butterfly. It can be found in woodland habitats throughout southern Britain and much of Europe and the Palearctic, extending as far east as Japan. So you can see these adult white admirals have these dark wings with white bands. The contrast in colours helps break up their outline, which camouflages them from predators. And they have a wingspan of about 60 to 65 millimeters and have a distinctive, elegant flight consisting of short periods of wing beats and long glides. So the white admiral feeds on barbel blossoms and honeydew, and the female will lay its eggs singly on whiffs of honeysuckle, growing in dense woodland. The caterpillars are green with red and brown hairs and are camouflaged to a leaf by the mixture of their own droppings of the silk. As autumn approaches, they will form a tent-like structure made of leaf tissue known as a hybriculum, which secures it to the stem and then hibernates. Then the caterpillar will then awaken in the following spring after a brief spell of feeding and molt, revealing its spiky green skin. And they will also pupate during the summer, forming a green and gold chrysalis. And approximately about 2 weeks after that, the butterfly will emerge, which is quite interesting. And yeah, there's not too much information, though they are named in the classical tradition. So Camilla is the Greek mythology as an Amazon who died in battle, so she was quite a nice one. That's the scientific name, Camilla. That's the species name. And there's two different subspecies. There's the one that lives around Europe, and then the one japonica that lives around the Amur, Korea, China, and Japan, of course. So yeah, very, very interesting animal. I do like the White Admiral, another cool one to talk about. And that finishes off our butterflies. So yeah, that finishes off our butterflies. Both butterflies done by Scott as part of the British Butterfly Pack. Bloody amazing pack, if I do say so myself. So next up, we've got some exhibit mods done by the great Narwhal. How can you not love a Narwhal? We have got the Sabertooth Longhorn Beetle. So that's a big name for a big beetle. So we'll have a look in here and see if we can find anyone hiding out. Ooh, definitely having a good time in there. So you can see, have a good look at a few of them hanging out. So the scientific name for this species is Madrodonta cervicoris, also known as the saber-toothed longhorn beetle. Is one of the largest beetles. So it's up there, it's a big boy. If one allows for the enormous mandibles of the males, which derives from both the name of its binomial name, Macrodonta, so long tooth, macro big, or donta teeth, long tooth, and cervicornis, which means deer antler. So cervus is the genus name for a lot of deer, so things like elk and red deer, and antler, ornis. Measurements of the insect normally exclude legs, jaws, and horns, but if jaws are included, the longest known specimen of the species is 17.7 centimeters, with the longest known specimen of the Hercules beetle is 17.5, and the longest known beetle, excluding jaws or horn, is Titanus gargantuus, which is 16.7 centimeters. So it is, if you include the jaws, it is the longest beetle. So most of this species spends its life in the larval stage, which can be up to 10 years, with the adult phase lasting no more than a few months, during which time dispersal and reproduction takes place. The female will often lay eggs under bark or dead or dying softwood trees, and in which hatch the babies will go down into the rotten wood, creating extensive galleries over a meter long and 10 centimeters wide. They are considered vulnerable species. They are threatened with things like climate change and things like that, but they are found in the rainforests of Colombia, Ecuador, Peru, Bolivia, Brazil, and the Guianas. So they are widespread around those areas, which is quite cool. And we'll see if we can find a little bit more information on them in the Zoopedia. Amazing animals. Let's see if we can find anything. Mention that. Use their massive jaws for fighting. Yep. Adults do not eat, but they spend all their energy finding a mate, reproducing. The babies do all the eating, as they eat the wood, so they're detritivores. They eat like decaying wood. The galleries of rotten wood, yeah, I mentioned that. Apparently associated with the Maria palm, and this big tree that might be the key for their conservation. So that's another interesting little fact there. But yeah, bloody amazing, aren't they? Look at these cool little guys. Look at this little one here. So that shows how big beetles can get. A really beautiful animal. Definitely love them. Really, really cool. So that's another great Narwhal mod. We're going to have a look at the next one. We have got here a fish this time. We've got the West African lungfish. So let's see if we can find one swimming around. There we are. The West African lungfish. So this is Protopteros annectens. This is also known as the African lungfish or the Tana lungfish. These guys are a species of African lungfish and are found in a wide range of freshwater habitats in West and Middle Africa, as well as in northern half of Southern Africa. So you can see these guys are quite cool. They've got prominent snout and small eyes. They've got an eel-like body with about 9 to 15 times the length of the head. They also have 2 pairs of long filamentous fins, with the pectoral fin having a basal flinge that is 2 to 3 times the head length, while the pelvic fin is about twice the head length. And in general, they have 3 external gills and are inserted posterior to the gill slits above the pectoral fins. They do have gills, but they also have, as I mentioned, lungs. They have cycloid scales embedded in the skin. About 40 to 50 scales occur on the operculum and the anus, and about 36 to 40 along the row of the original dorsal fin. And they have 34 to 37 pairs of ribs, and the dorsal side is olive to brown color, and the ventral side is lighter. As you can see, generally across their body is like brownish spots, or blackish spots around their body, except for on their belly. And they can get quite big. They can grow to about 1 meter long, about 3 feet, and weigh about 4 kilograms. So the ones in here are probably a little bit too small. But that's just because you can't really change exhibit sizes very well. But it'd be cool to know about 1 meter long. That's still a really big animal. So in terms of their distribution, they are distributed throughout Africa. They have 2 subspecies, P. annectens annectens, found at the bases of the Sahel in Guyana and Sierra Leone, while the other species, Berini, is found on the upper Congo and from Zambezi to Mozambique. And like other species of lungfish, they are an obligate air breather and a freshwater dwelling fish, and is also demersal, which means they like to live primarily buried in riverbeds. And during the dry season, because these rivers frequently dry up, the West African lungfish can estivate for up to a year. So that's like the opposite of hibernation. It's when the summer, they dry. They get like a wet cocoon and go in the mud and stay warm and breathe, and they can estivate for up to a year. However, these guys generally only estivates during wet seasons, between wet seasons. So in terms of their diet, they have a diet not unlike other species of lungfish. It consists of various mollusks, crabs, prawns, and small fish. They can also go up to 3.5 years without any food intake whatsoever. And during this time, the period, it behaves much like an estivating fish, as it buries itself in the mud and does not move until more favorable conditions occur. And when they estivate, it burrows itself about 12 to 18 inches deep into the mud. As the mud dries and the mucus that envelops the fish forms a cocoon, and the fish then has no direct contact with the outside environment. However, a tube of dry mucus goes into the pharynx and allows the fish to breathe. The fish usually relies on protein for energy, so the nitrogenous waste of amino acids is converted to urea, which builds up in the tissues and is only excreted when the lungfish returns to water. So yeah, another really cool fact about these guys. Really, really cool to see West African lungfish. Another cool species we get to talk about. Really, really awesome. So we're going to leave them and let them to do their own thing. So now we're going to move on to another cool species. This one is done by Mega Kebab. These two are done by Nawala. This new monkey is done by Mega Kebab. We have got the Rollaway Monkey. Another really cool monkey. So let's have a look at these guys. Let's see if we can get a camera look at them. Look how beautiful they are. Mega Kebab coming back with some really awesome species. So the Rollaway monkey, or Sabertooth rollaway, these guys are a species of old wood monkey that are only found in West Africa. It was previously considered a subspecies of the Diana monkey, which we'll be covering later. And this species is actually considered critically endangered due to their habitat loss and continued hunting for bushmeat, which is interesting. So in terms of this description, you can see it's kind of a species of Guam monkey. In fact, it's the largest of all the 26 species of African Sabertooth. And of this genus, the Rollaway monkey is most similar to the Diana monkey, and both of these share physical features, having dark hair surrounding the majority of their body, dark round reddish patch on the lower backs. But the Rollaway monkey has a prominent beard, a white beard under its black chin, and a horizontal white stripe of fur from its brow bone. You can see its face is kind of a dark black, with bright white fur around it and that big beard. And they have a relatively flat skull, and unlike many other primates, do not have an enlarged chin cavity, which is referred to as a rostrum. In addition, the nostrils of the monkey are closely set and angled downwards. And you can see the chest as well. It's got like a bit of counter shading. Its chest and belly are all kind of bright white. And on the inside of the thighs, their fur can change from white, red, brown, even yellowish. They also have exceptionally long tails, which are longer than the entirety of their body. And there are not many body measurements for adult Rollaway monkeys, but comparing an analysis of different species, they would have a body length of 40 to 55 centimeters and tails about 50 to 75 centimeters. Male monkeys will weigh about 5 kilograms or 11 pounds, and a female will weigh about 2.5 kilograms or 5 pounds. They also have a distinct cheek pouch, which they share with a lot of other species of these Sabertooth monkeys. This allows them to store fruits, nuts, and seeds, and the majority of their diet, as they are omnivorous. They also have opposable thumbs that are quite well developed, and fingernails. They also have quite a long lifespan and can live up to about 20 to 30 years. So their habitat is actually quite restricted. They live in a small area in the Ivory Coast, near the forests of Guyana, between the Sandrissa and Para rivers, and may possibly occur in Burkina Faso and Togo. They inhabit the canopy of older growth forests, including gallery forests and most low-lying forests. And they cannot live in areas where humans have a large impact, so they typically only live in secluded primary forests. Luckily, these ones have not been majorly affected, and it can allow for populations to exist. And these forests can be very lush, and they have very complex habitats. So that allows them, have many different habitats and things to find around in. Small areas of these forests can usually inhabit the monkeys, and the group size of these species tend to be very small. Even when studies tried to find them, they're really hard to spot, and that's because the population is so low. It's really just hard to spot. But yeah, as I mentioned, they are critically endangered. Omage as well, they are an omnivorous species. That means they'll feed on both plants and animals. This means these primates will primarily consume various fruits, leaves, flowers, and even insects. And because insects are included in their diet, they have been described as insectivores, even though being labelled as an omnivore. In addition, they will also consume a large variety of larvae and eggs of certain invertebrates for nutrition. And they feed primarily on 130 different species of trees, climbers, and epiphytes. And like many other omnivores, they will eat mature fruit pulps, amphipods, oil-rich seeds, and young leaves. And the diet of the Rollaway monkey is one that's been observed for quite some time, and it will vary at different times of the year. So this means during the dry season they'll eat more fruits and pulp. But during the wet season they'll eat more insects that are out and available for hunting, and then consume less fruit. So it just depends on the time of year, things like that. And when hunting for food, they will also use the most direct path and may choose not to swing or jump through the branches as well. And in terms of predation, they actually do not employ its fight instincts, rather fleeing from danger. Typical predators of the Rollaway monkey include lemurs, large birds of prey, chimps, and other larger species. And they use warning signals and even like physical signals to say where a threat is near and things like that. So they use things like that. And behavior, these guys are typically a diurnal monkey, so they only really come out during the day and spend their night high in the canopy, similar to other primates and some other mammals too. The species forms social groups of about 6 to 30 individuals, typically with about a single male and about 10 females in the offspring. Males may change between groups, with females generally staying in the same group of which they were born. And with a reduced population of the Rollaway, the habits of staying in the same group can impose restrictions on the ability of the species to recuperate. But for monkeys, most of the day is spent finding food, and in between hunting. During rest times, they'll take time to groom each other and care for their young. This is the primary time for bonds to form and strengthen, and the rest period during the day allows a great time for infants to learn and grow. In addition, this monkey is social and will interact with other monkeys that inhabit the same area. The younger juveniles will not be as outgoing and strong as the adults. Juveniles are more reliant on the adults and their staying in surroundings, things like that. And like other species of monkey, they're very advanced species methods of communication, using many different types of calls to communicate with each other. So some will be frequent calls males will make to kind of gather the females. Verbal communication is not the only form. They'll use physical communication, and the raised eyebrows usually is a sign of threatening each other. Also, baring teeth is another way. Very similar to other species. And we'll talk about reproduction now, because I know we love talking about the reproduction of these cute little monkeys. And we want more of them. They are critically endangered. So much of the information that comes from the reproduction of these monkeys is based on the closely related Diana monkey. And while they are different species, their reproductive behavior is very similar. They are polygamous, which means one male will act as the leader of the group. Females go through an estrous cycle about 30 days, and this can occur any time throughout the year. This means there's no specific time for breeding, but a male can mate with the female whenever estrus occurs. Female Rollaways normally give birth to a single infant, or really even twins. And those siblings, the female monkey is the primary caretaker, and she gives birth typically after a 6-month gestation. So she'll take care of the baby primarily, but siblings and other non-monkeys in the group will take care of the babies as well. The mother will suckle the infant for about 6 months and then feed him a like diet, like seeds and fruits and nuts. They tend to reach maturity about 3 to 4 years of age, and the young male will typically leave the group and go find a new group, but the females will stay in there. As I mentioned as well, their lifespan is about 20 years, but captive individuals is about 30. Captive Rollaways will typically go through hormonal changes that restrict their ability to effectively mate and reproduce. If the conditions match with those of their home habitat, they can reproduce as they would in the wild. So these guys are a very threatened species of monkey. We'll get into why they are so endangered. We'll have a little look. So the Rollaway monkey is very threatened, labelled as critically endangered, and they've been continuing to rapidly decline, so they are considered critically endangered. They're actually considered one of the top 3 most threatened monkey species on the west coast of Africa, and may actually be the most threatened primate in Africa, so that's a big worry. They require a habitat of primary forest in order to survive, and the issue with such forests is undergoing rapid levels of deforestation because of human purposes. which is causing extreme levels of habitat loss for so many species, including the Rollaway. Guyana, which is a country where the species most frequently spotted, their kind of forest cover has gone down 90% over the past 100 years, and this loss of habitat is so profound that they're not good at adapting to these new changes, and this has meant they're listed as one of their 25 most endangered primates, and there's actually believed to be no more than a couple thousand individuals left. And they do continue to decline because of how hunters value the meat of the species quite highly, so they are hunted for bushmeat. And the once expansive forest inhabited continues to shrink as roads and transportation areas expand and using all that land for forests, and there's fewer and fewer sightings. And not only are their predators are animals such as chimpanzees, leopards, and crowded eagles, but they're also largely affected by humans. As I mentioned, they are a primary target for Guyana bushmeat, and because it's unique, and because they make loud noises when communicating, that makes it easier for hunters to find them. And habitat loss is that other big issue as well. But now, considering the orchids are so endangered, there are conservation efforts that need to be taken to save the species. And there is great recognition for how threatened the species is, but not a lot of action is actually going to protect them. CITES has labelled them as a Class A species, and there's quite a few issues with trying to make policies to help the species. There are not many laws enforcing protection of the species, though there are some small foundations trying to protect the species and the habitats they live in. Large conservation programs are trying to aid in the revival of the species through either captive breeding or other methods. Unfortunately, they've hit a point where their breeding is not extensively successful, and even if we breed all these monkeys, where are they going to go into the wild? Because there's not a lot of habitat for them left. Currently, efforts need to be in place to find a new location for these monkeys. That thrive after breeding programs has made a large population and has potential to be released. Though in 2020, however, a small win, the United Kingdom have a large celebration of the first ever birth of the Rollaway monkey in their country. There are current breeding programs all over the world for this species, and where they may not have been largely successful, this is a small win. The recent breeding programs have had their struggles because these monkeys have a difficult time acclimating to one another and are not entirely willing to breed. There's also quite few in captivity, and the breeding is quite selective, so inbreeding depression is unfavourable and could worsen the conservation status of the species. So yeah, they are facing an uphill battle and are critically endangered, but hopefully it's not the end of the road for them. As long as we get some good protections, there are people that care about these monkeys and want to protect them. So yeah, another critically endangered species today, one of 3 today. So that's the Rollaway Monkey, done by Mega Kebab. Next up, we've got a couple birds. We're going to be starting off with a Lobby mod. We've got the Guam Rail, which is quite an interesting one I'd like to talk about. So here's the Guam Rail, also known as the Koko or the Chamorro. These guys are a small rail endemic to Guam, so only found in Guam, and are one of the only few remaining endemic bird species there. And the species was actually considered extinct in the wild, became extinct in the wild in the early 1980s, when biologists captured the remaining wild population and established a breeding program. But they have since been introduced into nearby Rota and Cocos Islands. They've become the second bird species to go from extinct in the wild to critically endangered. So Guam rails are a medium-sized rail species, growing to about 11 inches or 28 centimeters in total length. Adults will weigh about 7 to 12 ounces, or about 200 to 350 grams. They also have this elongate body with small wings and medium-sized legs. They do have undeveloped wing muscles and are considered flightless, though they can fly about 3 to 10 feet or 1 to 3 feet at once, and their strong legs muscles make them fast runners. And adult rails are monomorphic, which means males and females have the same colours and plumage. They're primarily brown, as you can see, with a grey bill and quite a tan colour. Their head and back is brown. They have a grey eye stripe and throat, a dark brackish breast with a white barring, and their legs and stuff, you can see, are dark brown. So in terms of their habitat and distribution, historically they were only found on the island of Guam. Today they are still found in Guam, though in captivity, with wild populations introduced to the nearby Rota and Cocos Islands. But since 1985, they've only lived in captivity in Guam, located in the Guam Department of Agriculture. Guam is an island that's about 132,230 acres, and according to Tropical Survey, about 53% of the island is forested. The climate is tropical marine with little changes in temperature, though there is a dry season that lasts from January till May. They were once distributed widely across most of the island, living in all sorts of different habitats, including agricultural areas, mixed forests, savannas, and things like that, and observed that they noted preferred edge habitat with good cover. So in terms of their behavior, they're a very fast, secretive bird. Though they are capable of short bursts of flight, they seldom fly. They were found most frequently in savanna or scrub mixed areas, found in uniform tracts of mature forest, and usually found in dense vegetation, but observed bathing and feeding along roadsides or forest edges. Its call is like a loud, piercing whistle or series of whistles, usually given by two or more birds in response to a loud noise, and the call of another rail or any other disturbances. Though individuals will respond almost invariably to the call of another rail, the species is generally silent. So in terms of breeding, they are a year-round nester. So let's have a look at the babies while we do that. They are a year-round nester. Look at these cute little guys. And lay about 2 to 4 eggs per clutch, with both parents sharing in the construction of the shallow nests of leaves and grass. They mature about 6 months of age and have been known to produce up to 10 clutches per year in captivity. Their nesting habits make them highly susceptible to predators, such as the native Merino monitor, and also invasive feral pigs, cats, feral dogs, mangrove monitors, brown tree snakes, black rats, and Norway rats. In terms of feeding, though, they are omnivores, so they will eat gastropods, so things like snails and slugs, insects, geckos, seeds, and vegetable material. A large part of their diet did consist of giant African snails, which were introduced to Guam around 1985 and became quite an easy food source. Pieces of snail shell and coral have been found in the stomachs and gizzards as potentially used as grit. And Guam rails have been observed foraging and hunting, and when hunting they peck food on the ground and eat the seeds and things like that, and they've been observed hunting insects, in particular butterflies. So why are they so critically endangered? We'll get into that. So the brown tree snake was one of the primary threats of its survival, and the introduction of the snake was actually very catastrophic for Guam's biodiversity. The snake was likely passively introduced from being a stowaway in military cargo ships after World War II. Once introduced to Guam, they thrived with an abundance of lacking natural predators, and being an opportunistic feeder, they'll pretty much eat anything. The snake is also nocturnal and arboreal, adapting to eating roosting and nesting prey, and over time they actually really decimated the populations of not only just rails, but also Guam kingfishers, which are also considered critically endangered. I think they are extinct in the wild too, but a lot of those species are really affected as well. But as I mentioned, also introduced species such as black rats, Norway rats, mangrove monitors. I'm not sure if mangrove monitors introduced, but there are introduced species like feral pigs and Philippine deer. They destroy the forest that they live in, and this causes them to decline. So deers thinning out the forest and pigs wallowing. That thins out the forest canopy and destroys the soil and changes the ecology and decreases ground cover, which is really bad for small species like this that tend to use ground cover to hide better from predators and do okay. And feral cats have been another major barrier, and they tried to reintroduce them into the Essen Air Force Base in 2006, with feral cats killing all the introduced birds within 8 weeks. So that's quite sad. But yeah, invasive species like feral cats, rats, both brown and black and Norway rats, all them, introduced deer and stuff, they all contribute to changing the habitat and predating on them themselves, which has caused big issues in their decline in the population. And they were sadly quite an abundant species. There was an estimated population of about 60 to 80,000 in the late 1960s to early 1970s, but 9 of the 11 species of native forest-dwelling birds have been extirpated from Guam. 5 of these were endemic at the species or subspecies level and are now extinct. The Guam Rail and the Guam Kingfisher, though, are bred in captivity and are hoped to eventually be released back into the wild. Several other native species exist in precociously small numbers. Their fruit on Guam is perilous, and with most native forest species, including the Guam Rail, were virtually extinct when they were listed as threatened or endangered by the US Fish and Wildlife in 1984. Appreciable losses of the Guam Rail was not evident until 1960s, and then several formerly abundant rails had disappeared in islands where parts of the island where snakes were most populous. And by the late 1960s, they started to decrease in the central and southern parts of the island. and they continued to decline, with the last wild rail being seen in 1987. But luckily, someone came to their rescue. So zoologist Bob Beck, who was the wildlife supervisor of Guam Department of Agriculture, Division of Aquatic and Wildlife Resources, was credited in leading the efforts to capture the remaining wild grails, Guam rails, Guam kingfishers, and other native species to save them from extinction. His efforts to save the rails began in 1982 and lasted more than 20 years. Beck was considered to be instrumental in capturing the remaining population of Guam rails and establishing breeding programs for the species in Guam. He later established release sites for these introduced populations on the nearby islands of Rota and the Northern Marina Islands. Beck was also the driving force in establishing Guam rail breeding programs and zoos back on the mainland US, with initially beginning with just 3 zoos, which was the Bronx Zoo, the Philadelphia Zoo, and the National Zoo in Washington. This program proved to be successful and then expanded to other zoos, and then as of 2008, about 17 other zoos had now participating in this breeding program to breed and release, including the Audubon Zoo, San Diego Zoo, Santa Fe College Teaching Zoo, and zoos in Chicago, Houston, and San Antonio. So the efforts of Beck and others saved the Guam, have been promising. So it's believed to be there's 120 living Guam rail in captivity and approximately 35 in captive breeding programs throughout the United States. And biologist Gray Wills, who worked on the species program since 1981 to throughout 2000, said of his efforts as Bob was one of the first to begin organising catching birds so they could be brought in captivity, held there and bred. He started a captive population. We still have Guam rails today because of his efforts, so he really did save the species. And Suzanne Medina, who was a wildlife biologist, considers him the champion of the koko and helped prevent the species extinction. So very important that some people like Doc Merton, who's the New Zealand equivalent, saved species like the kakapo and the Chatham Islands black rail. It's just the one person is responsible for saving that species, and it must be a real honour to be credited with that. So the recent efforts to introduce rails back to Guam in a 22-hectare forest area is concentrated on protecting rails and limiting snakes using a combination of trapping and a perimeter barrier to reduce reinvasion by snakes. This endeavour allowed the tentative to survival of several pairs of rails released into the area, with reproduction by the rails was also reported in control areas of the basis of sound attributed to chicks. And the preliminary studies consist of one of the few bright spots of the conservation of the Guam's native fauna and speaks to new opportunities. So they luckily now doing slightly better. There's at least some wild ones now. They're just considered critically endangered. And in November 2010, 16 Guam whales were released to the Tortoiseshell Island, which is a 33-hectare atoll located 1 mile off the southern tip of Guam. It is part of a reconstruction 2 decades after its extinction. And there was an effort to provide safe nesting areas for the rail, as well as a place for the public to see them in the wild. And because of these reintroductions, before the reintroductions, rats were eradicated and forests were further enhanced to help the species. A native lizard survey was conducted to make sure the rails had enough food to eat. Monitor lizard populations were reduced to minimize the impacts on the newly released rails, and the reintroduction proved to be quite successful, and evidence of breeding has been observed, and this will provide us a model environment to develop strategies to help further reintroductions, as well as expertise in rodent and snake detection, eradication, and biosecurity measures. So the future of the rail is looking actually quite bright, now that we've managed to successfully release them into an area and have now a wild population starting up. It's good to know that these efforts are paying off, and who knows, we might get rid of all the introduced rats and mice and brown shrew snakes out of Guam and reintroduce them finally, and they can get back to their former glory of 60 to 80,000. That would be the dream. But yeah, another really cool extinct in the wild to critically endangered species, and shows how good these conservation efforts can be. The Guam Rail, done by Lorby. Awesome job. And now I've got one closer to home for me, because I actually know people that have worked with these animals before, all that stuff. We have got the black stilt, or Khaki. So, really, really cool animal. I'll refer them simply as Khaki from now on, because that's their Māori name, and I like using the Māori name typically. So the Khaki is a wading bird found in New Zealand, and is actually one of the world's rarest birds. And as of May 2020, the population is sitting as about 169 birds, so about 170. So you can see they've got quite a distinctive black colour, hence the name black stilts, long pink legs and a long thin bill. and they are largely breed in the Mackenzie Basin in the South Island and are threatened by feral cats, ferrets, hedgehogs, as well as habitat degradation by dams, agriculture, and invasive weeds. So they are a species threatened by a lot of things. So black stilts are one of the several species in the genus Haematopus, which is related to the pied stilt, which is from Australia and is introduced into New Zealand. And it's actually part of the reasons why they are so endangered is because of the pied stilt interbreeding with these species and potentially, breeding with them and hybridizing with them. Black and pied stilts in New Zealand represent two colonizations of pied stilt ancestors from Australia, with the first long ago giving rise to these animals, and then the pied stilt in the early 19th century came back and took over as these guys started to decline. So they are closely related. We actually do have a pied stilt where I work, so they're quite cool guys. In terms of the description, black stilts are medium-sized or 220-gram wader birds with extremely long pink legs, red eyes, distinctively black plumage, and a long slender black bill, with juveniles having a white breast, neck, and head with a black patch around the eyes and black belly feathers that distinguish them from pied stilts. So black adult plumage appears in their first or second year, and black plumage may be an adaptation to absorb heat better in the cold windstrip habitat of their glacial riverbeds and lake shores. So they do breed in the South Island around the Mackenzie Basin, which is an alpine grassland. Well, not quite alpine, but it is a flat area next to glaciers, so it can get quite cool. Young stilts typically have, we'll have a look at a young stilt. So young stilt, you can see, has typically got a bit of white on them, but also hybrids will have, let's see if we can find them, yeah. So this is a juvenile. So these are juvenile stilts, and hybrids will have these kind of colours to them, but there's ways to tell them apart, as I'll get into. But hybrids between black and pied stilts tend to have very variable in colour, but they usually have black breast feathers, while pied stilts never do. So in terms of the habitat, although black stilts currently breed only in the braided rivers of the South Island, some fossil bones show that they lived in all sorts of different habitats across New Zealand, such as narrow bush streams in Hawke's Bay, and a wetland surrounded by forest in North Canterbury. And also, lived all across New Zealand in habitats basically occupied today by pied stilts. In the 19th century, they bred on riverbeds and wetlands of the central eastern North Island and most of South Island except Fiordland. In the 1940s, they were still common in South Canterbury and Central Otago, and nesting occurred in Central Otago as late as 1964, though their range has been entirely replaced by pied stilts, which colonised New Zealand after human settlement, and their population is estimated to be about 30,000. Currently, since they are so endangered, they still breed only in the other Waitaki River system in the Mackenzie Basin. Most black stilts will overwinter in the Mackenzie Basin, but some of the population, especially hybrids or those paired with pied stilts, will migrate to areas such as the Kawhia and Kaipara harbours for January and winter, so you do have the chance to see them if you're in the North Island. But in terms of breeding, black stilts breed at 2 or most usually 3 years old. They nest in solitary pairs, not in a productive colony like pied stilts, with both birds collaborate on building the nest in July and August on stable islands or banks on shingle riverbeds, with pairs tending to nest in the same site each year. And 3 to 5 eggs are typically laid from September to December, peaking in October, which are incubated for about 25 days. Chicks will take about 6 to 8 weeks to fledge and remain with their parents for a further 6 to 8 months. So, despite decades of intensive protection, they are still one of the rarest species of wader birds and one of the most endangered bird species in the world. Their numbers would have believed to have numbered between 500 to 1,000 in 1940s, but rapidly declined in 1950s to just 68 individuals counted in 1962. This intensive management began in 1981 with only believed to be 23 adult birds, and in 1984 there were 32 adult birds, rising to 52 birds in 1992. As of May 2020, the wild population is about 169 birds. A captive breeding program of the Khaki was maintained for breeding and subsequent wild release in Tortoiseshell, that is managed by DOC and the Isaac Conservation and Wildlife Trust, which one of my workmates used to work at. Eggs are collected each year for rearing and from both wild and captive birds. And 2021 is actually the second best year on record for breeding, with 39 breeding pairs, 175 eggs collected, and 66 left to hatch on the nest. Each year, juvenile captive bred birds are released around the Goulburn, Caras, and Tasman rivers in the Manahuka or Mackenzie Basin, or in August to September, 120, 30 in 2019, and over 150 in 2021, 143 in 2023. So this annual release of these birds, combined with predator control, has prevented them from going extinct. So it's a lot of effort to protect the species, but they're definitely worth it because they are very great. So the main threats they face are predators. So New Zealand has a whole suite of introduced mammals that are prey on all sorts of our endangered native birds, such as muscelids, such as stoats, ferrets, weasels, and cats. They were released into the Mackenzie Basin and around New Zealand to patrol rat numbers. Rabbit numbers. But black stilts are very vulnerable to these predators because they nest on the banks of streams and rivers rather than islands. The nesting begins in late winter where their numbers are low, and then currently the nest is solitary pairs, so they don't have the protection of a colony like pied stilts do. And compared with pied stilts, they have a more notable plumage because they just as solid dark, and they are less likely to form distraction displays when incubating, and the chicks also take longer to fledge, which all just contribute to them being a lot easier to pick off for introduced predators. Though intensive trapping and electric fences are used to protect black stilt breeding sites to control predators, and because most Khaki nest on private land, DOC has to work with landowners to create these networks. And in terms of another issue as well as hybridization. So hybridization with the far more numerous pied stilt is also a major threat to the black stilt gene pool. Though hybridization is a symptom of the continued decline of the black stilt population, with black stilts choosing the darkest plumage partner, but mixed species pairings can also happen with potentially just because black stilt males mates are so rare. And black stilts will mate for life, so once black stilt is mated with the pied stilt, that's who they're going to be with for the rest of their life, so you lose a potential breeder. And there has been some research finding out exactly how these introduced ones impact the hybridization, as hybridization affects the population. Luckily, it's not as bad as we thought, because often these hybrids don't breed really with either. Often these hybrids don't get to breed. But if they do, it's not going to be a huge contributor. They tend to go back to black stilts, which just happens to be a thing that they do. So it's luckily not as bad as we thought, and they are closely related species. One thing with, a lot of people go on about purity and hybridization, but really, most animals hybrid to something. Humans, we hybridize historically with animals like Denisovans and Neanderthals, well, people like Neanderthals, Denisovans, potentially other species of human. A lot of bison have hybridized with cattle. It's really something that's kind of like there's no such thing as purity in nature, but still it could actually help the species, helping them be more resilient to disease. It's kind of a catch-22. It depends, it's one of those things that's hotly debated. But anyway, the other big thing for their habitat issue is habitat loss. So they still rely on wetlands and braided rivers to feed, and a lot of these have been drained for agriculture, irrigation, or flood control, but also invasive weeds such as ristle lupin and crack willow are able to colonize the braided rivers that they like to use, which reduces nesting habitat and providing cover for predators. And because they like to nest on braided rivers, they are threatened by changes in river flow as a result of new and existing hydroelectric dams. As part of the Upper Waitaki power development, braided rivers in the Upper Waitaki will receive less water, which allows weeds to encroach in these breeding areas, and these are potential cover for predators. And in 1991, a new flow regime was introduced to reduce encroaching vegetation. Artificial lowering of the level of Lake Bellamore has also caused exposure to shallow riverbeds and deltas for it to feed, creating temporary foraging areas for black stilts. So it's not all bad, but yeah, they do need a lot of help, and luckily they are getting the help they need. There are people working to help the populations of Khaki. But yeah, really, really cool. So, yeah, I think that's a great place to end the video. So thank you, Scott. Thank you, Nawala. Thank you, Lulby and Mega Kebab. And thank you, Great Cake Smart. You've all done a wonderful job giving us some pretty awesome species. So, yeah, I really, really, really hope you guys have enjoyed this video. Hope you guys like and subscribe. Always remember to hit the little bell icons, get notified with anything. So, yeah, if you guys enjoyed this video, hope you guys like and subscribe. And bye-bye.